Hello everyone, we are here with Ivailo Mitrev, backend tech lead, and Georgy Iliev, data delivery tech lead in DocuMaster. We will talk about the development process in the company because in fact the process is the key factor for success of DocuMaster and its international recognition. So hello guys.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you.
Thank you for the kind invitation.
You're welcome. It is our pleasure. And okay, as I know, in the beginning, your product was developed to help the state and municipal administration in Norway, and it's is fully compliant with the Norwegian standard for electronic document management, NOARC. Where does the idea for documentation management software came from, and how the project got started?
Okay, let me start with that then, and bear with me because I'm going to try to fit 6 years of history in about 2 minutes. That's never easy. But let's establish the premise here. What you have already mentioned, NOAR, in Norway are required by law to have a software solution that uses a system that can that adheres to the requirements of that standard. And this is what DocuMaster is. This is the public sector product that we have been selling to our customers for more than 6 years now. And I can talk about multiple milestones in the history of DocuMaster. The most important, of course, is the establishing of the Norwegian entity back in 2014. That entity was established by 3 people back then, 2 Norwegians and 1 Bulgarian, the Bulgarian being a developer as well. And soon after the entity was established, they found out that they'll need a 4th person who is also a second developer, the second developer of the company. And these 2 people, the 2 developers, they were responsible for developing this initial version of the products that we maintain to this date for the public sector. And they decided to start using technologies that they're most familiar with. Those are open source technologies such as Java, PHP, Linux, PostgreSQL, which was somewhat unconventional amongst our competitors back then, because most of our competitors, they had Windows-based desktop applications that were definitely more difficult to maintain, while DocuMaster was hosted in the cloud and it relied entirely on open source technologies. So with this initial product that they managed to develop and managed to convince people to buy and win public tenders with it, in about a year and a half, they managed to win about 10 tenders, which effectively means that we had 10 customers in those 1 year and a half. So the DocuMaster name was already known to the public sector, and they started trusting our company. The next biggest milestone, at least that's how we view it here in Bulgaria, is the establishing of the office in Bulgaria. Our current CTO, and who is a Bulgarian, and also the co-founder of the company, managed to convince the rest of the team that Bulgaria has a lot of talented people with potential, and that the company could establish an office in Bulgaria that would be the tech hub of and the technical heart of DocuMaster itself. Me personally, I was the 6th person to be hired into that team. That was almost 5 years ago in the very beginning of 2016. And we gradually expanded and moved between offices because we saw that a technical team in Bulgaria works as a concept. And we were initially based in a small apartment building in Sofia. Then we expanded to a 2nd apartment, to 3rd apartment, until we eventually grew that big that we needed an entirely new office in an office building in Sofia. So this was the brief history until about 2018, when the public sector, for which I had mostly worked in the past 5 years, had already gained about 200 customers. 200 different municipalities, museums, and schools in Norway had entrusted us. But it was in 2018 when the idea was born for trying our luck in the private sector market as well. And this is about this. Gary can probably give you a little bit more information.
Thank you. Speaking of numbers, I was employee number 20, so I joined rather late in the game. However, I was very lucky because I was actually the first developer on that private market adventure. I'll start a little earlier than that. The year in which I actually joined the company, it was the year 2017. And this was a very important milestone year for DocuMaster because this is the year when it received its largest funding round to date, about 10 million euros. I remember back then I was wrapping up my previous job and preparing to start to embark on this new journey. However, DocuMaster was not a known name to me. I had been left with great impressions from the technical team, the CTO, and the people in Norway, who had appeared to me extremely professional and highly meticulous in that rigorous interviewing and testing journey. However, still, the DocuMaster brand was not known, so I was a bit hesitant, and I kept an eye on what was going on with this company that I was betting everything almost on. And late in 2017, I remember coming across this press release about DocuMaster having won the largest tender in its history. And this tender was with an organization called Helsedirektoratet, the Norwegian Directorate of Health. And you can imagine my awe when I read about this, because this is a very important client. The kind of documents that are managed under this contract are highly sensitive. So there was no way for just any company to win that sort of contract. So that served to appease my hesitation on one hand, but on the other, I was like, wow, what am I doing? These guys, they know what they're doing. They know their business. And what is it that I could bring to the table when I start next year with them? So you could call that like a mild form of imposter syndrome that just came over me. Now fast forward more than 2.5 years later. Last month we completed the delivery towards DocuMaster's probably largest commercial contract to date. And that delivery was the product that we started building back in 2018. So I'm extremely proud to have been part of this journey. And my imposter syndrome has gotten down a bit, but still it's there because it has been a great journey so far with all these incredible professionals around me. Yeah, I think this is enough as an introduction, and I hope that this talk can shed more light on this exciting journey that I have been a part of since day one in DocuMaster.
Okay, and how many specialists were part of DocuMaster's team in the initial stage of product development for the private sector? Which tech stacks is DocuMaster's product built on? And were there any challenges you faced, and how did you overcome them?
Thank you. I'll probably rearrange my answers because I think describing the challenges would be more beneficial to understand the tech stack choices that we have made later on. About the team setup, like I mentioned, I was the first backend developer on this team, and when I joined, the team was formed by a product manager in Norway, a UX specialist who was splitting her time between the private product and this new emerging thing, which we didn't call it a product back then. And myself. Shortly after, we were joined by a dedicated front-end developer in Norway. And later in that same year, the team grew by a senior UX specialist, again in Oslo. And this was the team that developed the first, I wouldn't call it an MVP, but the first prototype, which was eventually deployed in production for a paying customer in the end of 2018. A modest team size, but for the kind of work that we were doing back then, I think the size of the team was just right. Now about the challenges. I'll start with my personal challenges first, because when I was joining DokuMaster back then, I had my own expectations of the kind of work that I was going to do, and the kind of challenges that I was going to be solving. So I expected basically to be working on cool features, to be building cool stuff that would take the world by storm. So already on my second day at work, I'm not sure whether my laptop was properly configured yet even, but I was on that call discussing an AI component which we would embed into a bank's information system to filter out sensitive communication and not allow like emails mentioning sensitive stuff to leave the bank system. Not that the bank had asked for it, right? But we were discussing this kind of problems, and we had solutions to them, or I had solutions to them. So in a sense, I had brought with me a bag of solutions to problems that probably nobody was trying to solve. So soon after, we figured out a couple of weeks, a couple of months later, we figured out we've been having those meetings, those discussions, trying out different things, but we're not going anywhere. And thanks to a great professional product manager, we were pulled back from the domain of like castles in the sky, and just reminded that we're here to build a product, and which means that we had to approach the work in a completely different way. So we shouldn't be applying solutions to problems that nobody was trying to solve. First, we had to identify a problem which was widespread enough and significant enough to organizations out there in the private domain, to which we could develop a solution. What that solution was secondary to the problem, and in doing so, we had to distill the message that we present to our potential clients, so that whatever problem they have, we have the message telling them we have the solution to this problem, and this problem only. So this was probably the first major realization on my part. Even before I had joined, the product manager that I mentioned had been in talks with prospects across Norway, and had discovered that what we had in the mature product, what we call today DokuMaster Archive, was not a good fit for the needs of corporate customers, which came as a surprise because it was 100% perfect fit for professional archivists in the Norwegian public sector. And all of a sudden, the things that this great, amazing tool was able to do made no sense to prospects that we were talking to. So we realized that if we want to generate any interest, we need to come up with a proof of concept, with a prototype or an MVP, a minimum viable product, as quickly as possible, because what we had simply didn't trigger any interest. And how we approach that, our product manager being the driven guy that he is, and in the end of this talk, I hope I'll be able to share a link with you to add to this video, to a talk that he gave last year about our approach to product development, which he referred to as hypothesis-driven development. So out of the mature DocuMaster archive product, which provides a very rich array of functionality, he came up with a very small subset of features that could make up a roadmap. And when implemented correctly, when implemented the way that our clients or our potential clients in the corporate domain expected them to be, could make us successful. However, in putting together that roadmap, he had to meet a lot of prospects in a very short time, and to just to gather what we call data points, because it's not enough for one potential client to like what you're doing because you're building a product, right? So you need to make sure that there are quite a few clients out there that would benefit from the feature that you're developing. However, that comes at a cost. In order for us to make sure that we're on the same page when meeting clients, we had to develop very quickly. We had to try out different things. And make sure that we have something to show at the next client meeting. So we had to adopt something of a startup mentality. And this was taking place within an organization that was already maturing, that had already established processes in place to ensure quality, to ensure data integrity and whatnot in the public sector. And all of a sudden, that was not really what we wanted to focus on when we didn't know what we were building. So having a team of such small size, one front-end developer and one back-end developer, was clearly beneficial to us because it shortened the development cycle considerably. Because the communication was direct. We use no ticketing system, almost. We have it, we could use it, but most often we were just tapping on Slack. Front-end developer will be like, hey, I need this field to appear on the API, and I'm like, all right, in 15 minutes you have it there in that branch. No ticket, no nothing. And this mode of working went on for some time, but it also created a bit of frustration because all of a sudden you have this mini startup thing going on within this large maturing organization. So this was one of the main challenges during our first year. And from the challenges to the tech stack, because we had to be so extremely tactical in our approach, we couldn't afford to start building something from scratch, right? So very early on, this tactical decision was made that whatever we were building, whatever we were showing to our prospects, needed to be based on the DocuMaster architecture, on the existing core, at least the backend part of it. So that part of the tech stack didn't change. This was the Java server-side component, exposing web services via a PHP layer, and that in turn consuming Postgre backend and using also Solr, Apache Solr for full text indexing for searching. On top of that, we added a new Java component, a middleware, if you like, which would consume those web services and perform some shallow business logic, and in turn power the brand new front end which was being implemented in React.js. So this was the product architecture that we deployed to our first paying customer in the end of 2018. That was extended with a standalone component written in Python, which was responsible for some document pre-processing. This was the initial architecture of the product, and that evolved a little bit in the next year. In 2019, we removed the PHP layer because we needed to streamline the architecture and we needed to constantly improve our performance. So that went away. And this is what we had in the end of 2019, when we already had 3 paying clients, including 1 integrating party with our middleware's APIs, and about a dozen more pilot clients, some of which we have already converted to customers. So about a dozen pilot clients running that same architecture. And for one of them, we have developed 1 more integration.
Thank you. And what did it take to migrate the product from the public to the private sector? What changes and implementations were needed?
If we start comparing the 2 products, even though at that very early stage we were simply a client for that established product, but still it was being marketed as a separate product. The reason why DocuMaster Archive was built was because we wanted to serve the needs of public sector Norway, who were obliged by law to have a system of electronic records management compliant with a specific standard. So in a sense, the specifications for building that product were already there. They were already listed in the standard. Whereas in developing a product for the private market, we had absolutely no specifications in place. We did not know what we were going to build. So we were collecting data points from meeting clients and putting together a roadmap. So I'd like to think of the roadmap as something which is opposed to like a fixed pre-existing specification. So another thing that we had to solve was that every client that we spoke to, if they wanted to meet us at all, that meant that they had a problem already, that they had some documents lying somewhere, and they realized the need to improve the way those documents were managed on their end. There's no way you could go to an organization that doesn't maintain any sort of archive and sell them documentation management software. They're not going to start document archive the next day after they've signed the contract. So, and if that organization has been maintaining that archive, they already have some sort of tools and process in place. And most likely they are highly customized and they are highly specialized so that they serve their needs perfectly. Well, maybe not perfectly, but in the mind of the client, this is the best that they can. So anything that we could offer them had to be on a par with whatever system was already in place. So there was no way that we could like take away some of the functionality of what they already had. And on top of that, we needed to add our competitive edge, if you want, which was we couldn't compete on features because we at such an early stage we didn't know what features we actually wanted to be part of the product. So, but what was certain was that we needed consumer-grade user experience and we needed extremely high performance, so that whatever product we come up with, it is easy to use. and it appeals to the end user. So that was to be our competitive edge. Another thing is, in the public sector product, the data model, the intricacies of the data model, which is implemented in the relational database backend, are more or less reflected in the front end. And that's because the users are highly specialized, and they need all those like tweaks, all those bells and whistles there to be able to do their job properly. Now, this model, it proved next to impossible to explain to someone who was not really interested in archiving. We discovered that we simply had to hide away most of the complexity of that no-arc data model. So we put up this rather intricate facade in front of the existing DocuMaster API, which would basically filter out what was not interesting to our private sector clients, and translate the rest into some like neutral common language that could cut across multiple verticals and not be specific to any kind of industry or anything. And on the other hand, we in doing so, we were able to basically free the hands of the front-end developer and not require from them to learn the whole the whole model behind and what really applied there in terms of constraints, and why you would get an error message because you create a field in this way, and why you don't get the same error if you change something just a little bit. So in putting up a facade between the existing DocuMaster API and the new front end, the front end developer was able to focus on what really mattered, which was developing towards this consumer grade user experience. So in doing so, all of a sudden, to my surprise, to my backender's surprise, you could no longer use the argument that, well, this is how our backend works. If you want it done this way, well, you have to change the code on your end because this is how our backend works. No way. All of a sudden, decisions had to be made about the architecture in the backend and touching like core components of the backend, such decisions being prompted by specific needs to serve this kind of UX. So all of a sudden, backend development was kind of pushed a little bit further to the back. It doesn't mean that it lost its significance. No, quite on the contrary. By focusing so explicitly on UX, a great level of trust was given the backend development that they would get things right. So there is no question about it. And we need to fix the user experience, but we know that you're getting things right in the backend. And this is sometimes a heavy burden to bear. One last thing is different in the way we were developing this product from the start, is that there were features in the existing DocuMaster Archive product that were there, but were kind of nice to have things. And it turns out that those features are rather central to the UX that we are delivering, such as the ability to generate document previews on the fly. So for some of those things, such as the document previews, we had to come up with new clever ways of doing that were not really important for the kind of work that was being done by existing clients of the DocuMaster Archive product.
And was the technology behind the transition of information from different legacy systems into a single standard?
Again, I'll start with a little background, because we're no longer talking about a single standard, because standard scares prospects. You could talk about the standard, about NOARC to your Norwegian municipalities and your other kind of public sector stakeholders, but standard makes no sense for a corporate client who only wants to make sure that all the doc files that they have amassed somewhere on a drive, on a disk drive, are structured nicely in a nice web UI. So instead, we talk about the DocuMaster data model, and this is the standard that we're converting metadata to. Because DocuMaster is so young, and we were clearly trying to take some of the market share of the big names out there, but we didn't have their weight. We had to punch above our weight. So every time we would go about a client demo, there was no way that we could generate interest by simply showing a screenshot of DocuMaster or moving some sort of curated documents during that demo to DocuMaster, or some just lorem ipsum files. No, if we wanted to make sure that the client takes us seriously, we had to show their own data, that their own data is at home in DocuMaster. So from the very beginning, product development was tightly coupled to migrating actual client documents. And to a certain extent, it also shaped the way at least the server part of the product was being developed in those early months. And traces of those developments are still there in the product today, and they help us a lot in migrating new client data, because they shorten the time to deliver a compelling demonstration to a new client. The actual DocuMaster data model that we have today is the result of relentless hypothesis testing, of many meetings with clients and trying out many different things. As a result of that process of going back and forth, I believe we have now finally came up with a model which is simple enough to explain to a non-specialist, while at the same time is powerful and extensible to serve the needs of new clients in new verticals. So we no longer have to go back, add a table here, add a field there, change this data type or whatnot, just to serve the needs of a client demo. The model that we have distilled over the past 2.5 years is actually the standard to which we are migrating client data. The technical approach that we have adopted in doing so is what I like to call API first. So anything that we migrate to DocuMaster, first of all, what is a DocuMaster? Documentation management system, which contains files provided by the client. That could be Word documents, that could be PDFs, that could be pictures, that could be basically just anything, and the metadata describing those files. So when we move a document to DocuMaster, it doesn't matter whether you do it by dragging and dropping a file on the desktop in the web UI, or doing it in some automated fashion by our migration scripts. We consume the same APIs, and we don't have to do that actually, because we have access to the source code, we have access to the backend, we have access to the actual Linux environment. So we can do pretty much anything we want we can hack the system in any way we want, and this is fine. There are many use cases in which you can do it, and where this is a valid approach. But because of the early stage on which we were developing this product, we had to make sure that whatever changes we were making wouldn't break the product in some weird way. And the only way to ensure that was to migrate client data via the APIs. And that's why the API first approach. When we develop the actual mapping between the metadata that's on the client end and the DocMaster data model, we can't always rely on the client to tell us, well, this field maps to that. First of all, the client doesn't know the DocMaster data model. We don't want to spend time explaining to them in details what the model is. And on the other hand, if we are migrating an existing system, which the client has been maintaining for the past 10, 20 years sometimes, that is the best system that the client could come up with. So if there was any other way of structuring their content, they would have come up with it. So instead of asking them, all right, tell us what fields to map to what in DocMaster, we actually spend time alone with the client's data, and we study it, and we try to come up with an approximation of the mapping, of the actual mapping. And we take a small sample of those documents, we import them the way we believe are to be imported, we share the result with the client, we await feedback, we make the necessary changes, we re-import until the client is satisfied. And this process is iterative. It may take a very, very long time. Sometimes we're lucky. It takes one iteration and we're done. But usually somewhere in between. In the end, when we have finalized this mapping, we take all of the legacy content that the client has provided to us and perform a so-called dry run. And this typically takes place in a demo or a test environment. And we allow the client access to that for the purposes of UAT, of user acceptance testing. And once we have obtained the clearance on the UAT, then we perform exactly the same steps in the production environment. And this is what we hand over to the client, and they take ownership of their data in that production environment. The actual tools that we use in doing so, we're quite flexible. We're quite free to choose the tools and the frameworks, the languages to do so. Many of the things are written in Python. For some use cases, we use standard ETL tools, the ETL frameworks such as Apache Airflow. However, for some use cases, there are specific data wrangling steps that might require like knowledge of Bash shell scripting. Newcomers joining our team are sometimes surprised to discover even Perl code among our code base. So because of the specific challenges that every client presents, you must not be afraid to experiment with new languages and tools and new frameworks. But basically, we try to stick to Python, and whenever possible, just implement something in a nice pipeline in Airflow.